Okay, good morning, everybody. This morning, I want to talk about what is commonly referred to as chiyuvim, in terms of aliyos, in terms of davening for the Amud. It's an unfortunate choice of words, chiyuvim. I mean, we're all obligated to daven. We're all obligated in certain mitzvahs. So who has a chiyuv implies that there is a specific obligation for that person to receive an aliyah or to be given the opportunity to lead the davening over and above the normal obligation. It's like when the minyan gets together, who's got a chiyuv to daven tonight? We all have chiyuv to daven. Is there a special obligation for someone who's got a yortzeit or someone who has some other? And if it is a yortzeit, is it for a parent? Is it for a great uncle? Is it for someone's cousin's nephew? People make up all these chiyuvim. So I want to go through that in terms of aliyos, in terms of davening, although mostly focusing on the aliyos because you have some very interesting stuff there. Generally speaking, the Gemara in Gittin is a Mishnah, which sets up for us the order of aliyos. It says, and it gives a fascinating reason for it. Among the things that the rabbis ordained to keep the peace, so to speak, to avoid strife and arguments, Kohen Kore Rishon, the Kohen gets the first aliyah, the Achra of Levi, the Achra of Yisrael, Mipnei Darkei Shalom. Not for any other special reason. The reason that the Kohen gets the first aliyah and the Levi gets the second aliyah is to avoid machlokas, to avoid hard feelings, to avoid controversy. This is a Mishnah, and you can't get a better authority than a Mishnah. Again, the biblical verses support this, but they give it a different reason. When it talks about the Bnei Aharon HaKohanim, and is a separate mitzvah of a Kiddush Tov, that the Kohen is elevated in sanctity among the Bnei Levi. So based on that, he's given priority. But the Gemara views it different. The Gemara doesn't say, no, not because he's a Kohen, to avoid machlokas. Because you have other people who say, I want the first aliyah. I want to get Lane to be called up. A lot of fascinating discussion there. And the Gemara goes into greater detail as to whether or not this is biblical, based on the pasuk of the Kiddush Tov, that we have to give a certain derech eretz to a Kohen based on his status as a Kohen. So it's a separate mitzvah to honor the Kohen, and we do that by giving him the first aliyah, by having him bench first, to give him whatever priorities there might be in any rituals that we have. Give it to the Kohen first because of his elevated status.
In that same Mishnah, is there also rules and regulations, procedures? What if you have 10 Kohanim? So then how do they tell you how to pick which one?
Excellent question, yes. Because as we'll get to later on, even among Kohanim, first of all, there's age. If someone's an older Kohen, so you give deference to a person's age. If somebody is a Talmud Chacham, you give him deference.
What's the question?
If there are many Kohanim, how do you choose between them? Is there some type of hierarchy? And the truth is, there is a hierarchy. Again, it's based on status, it's based on their learning and so forth. And we'll see in a few moments that in some cases, a Talmud Chacham who is not a Kohen may even take preference to a Kohen. And in fact, in some situations, this actually happened in Bavel. And even in Eretz Yisrael, it happened a few times in the time of the Gemara.
If there's only one Kohen, does the whole thing make sense of the whole inconvenience of one person getting it all the time And,
Oh, that's-
No.
it's like-
If there's only one Kohen, then he gets the first aliyah. And even though it's the same guy all the time, nevertheless, because of the status of the Kiddush Tov, we have to elevate the status of the Kohen and give him a certain deference. Now, there are circumstances, as we'll see. Let's assume that there is a bris in the shul, and there's only one Kohen. So there might be room to say the Kohen can defer his honor and give it to the Baal Simcha. And then there's a separate discussion. Does that mean the Kohen has to go out of the room and miss Kriyas HaTorah? I mean, it's a lot of, we'll touch on some of those topics. But Darkei Shalom, if were it not for Darkei Shalom, the Kohen could theoretically give his lead to somebody else. But to avoid this problem, who do you pick? So we give the Kohen first. If there's no Kohen around, if there's no Kohen available, then you do not have to give it to a Levi. You do not, as a matter of fact, you shouldn't give it to a Levi, because the Kedusha of the Levi is contingent on the Kedusha of the Kohen. And I remember Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal was a Levi, and he was very makpid. If there was no Kohen there, he would not get the first aliyah, even though as the Talmid Chacham in the room, he was certainly entitled to it, where even if he weren't a Levi, never the fact. And I remember years and years ago, when Shomrei Torah was first getting started, many, before this building was even built, before the other building was even built, we had an alternate Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur minyan in TJ school for a couple of years. And I ran that minyan. And there was a member of the community, since deceased, who was a Levi. And there was no Kohen on Rosh Hashanah. So I called up a Yisrael. And he was upset. He was so angry. I'm a Levi. I should get the first aliyah. The halacha is not that way. But I remember that. We had a big fight about it.
When I was a gabbai there, generally you don't get Levi's. However, if the Levi has a chiyuv.
That's it. If he has a chiyuv, a separate chiyuv, that's we'll get to that. Yeah. If he has a chiyuv, a yard size, something else, then there's no problem. But normally, if there's no Kohen, then the first, and you say, Bimkom Kohen, there's no Kohen around, so Yamod, so-and-so Bimkom Kohen, and the Levi simply has to wait until there's a Kohen around, unless he has a separate chiyuv. Chiyuv meaning, and again, the language chiyuv is really a misnomer, because there is no halachic imperative for a person who has yortzeit to get an aliyah. I'll say it straight out. There's no halachic imperative. We have Jewish tradition and custom has endowed a yortzeit with some, sanctity of obligation to a person should get a kavod to get a daven for the amud, and a person should get an aliyah. But there's no real halachic obligation. There is a list, and I'll go through the list later, of kedima, of what's the order, what's the status of different obligations, different chiyuvim. Is there a difference for a person as a chiyuv for yortzeit for a parent, or for an uncle, or for his wife's parents? How do you determine all that? We'll get to that in a moment. Yeah.
Question. You said the Levi's importance is contingent on the Kohen. So if there's no Kohen, but the absence of a Kohen doesn't undo his Leviism.
No, it doesn't take away from the fact. It doesn't take away from the fact that he's a Levi. However, the order or the prioritization of who gets an aliyah, the Levi's position is contingent on the Kohen's position. So if there's no Kohen, the Levi has no priority, so to speak.
Because he served.
That's correct. That's correct. The Levi is contingent upon the Kohen. And if there's no Kohen, then there's nothing for him to be contingent on, so to speak. So that prioritization no longer exists. In a separate Gemara, which I find fascinating, and it'll feed into some of the other customs that we find in the Gemara, when it comes to saving lives, for example, and you have people drowning, and you have a choice between two, who do you pick first? Your father, your Rebbe, your Kohen? Among the separate discussions I don't want to get into now, but the Gemara says very clearly that a mamzer Talmud Chacham takes precedence over a Kohen Gadol Amoretz. Wow. When it comes to saving lives, if you have two people drowning, and one is a Kohen Gadol, but he's an Amoretz, and the other person is a mamzer, but he's a Talmud Chacham, you save the life of the mamzer Talmud Chacham. Fascinating discussion, but when it comes to Aliyahs, though, it's a different order of prioritization. But the Talmud Chacham status is very, very important. Again, the whole notion of the Kiddush Tov, we give the Kohen priority in almost everything whenever possible. But if the Kohen is not there, then the Levi it doesn't count, but he doesn't get that kedima or that prioritization. Okay, it's interesting that all of this discussion is talking about Shabbos and Yontif, and there's a lot of people in shul to give aliyahs too. On Mondays and Thursdays, when there's a smaller crowd in shul, we can be lenient in the sense that we may not have to call a Kohen. Again, I'm not talking, this is not halakha psak now. This is talking about a theoretical discussion in the Gemara. The Gemara says that on a Monday or a Thursday, where there aren't that many people in shul, you don't have to give the Kohen the first aliyah. The Gemara in Gittin Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis quotes a fascinating story that Rav Huna, great Talmud Chacham, the Gadol Hador, got the first aliyah even on Shabbos, even though he wasn't a Kohen. And the Gemara says, how could that be? We already heard the Pesach law. He was such a great Talmud Chacham that even Rav Ami and Rav Asi, who were Kohanim, were deferential to him. Now, there's a fascinating Tosfos on that Gemara. And Tosfos says, Rabbeinu Tam, that in Bavel, in Eretz Yisrael at that time, the reason you could do it, give a non-Kohen who's a Talmud Chacham and Aliyah on a Monday or a Thursday, because B'chol Havi Tridi B'malachtam, during the week people are busy, they're going to work. The Lo Shchichi, and there aren't a lot of people in shul on Mondays and Thursdays, so you could give a Talmud Chacham. Aval Didan, Rabbeinu Tam is writing in the 12th century, Shchichi b'sheni v'chamishi, we have big minyanim on Monday or Thursday. Kamo b'yom tov. So in France, where Rabbeinu Tam lived, they had big minyanim on Monday and Thursday as if it was Yontif, and therefore they wouldn't call up a non-Kohen to the first aliyah. What's that? Oh no, we don't do. We do not call up non-Kohanim. But the fact that Rav Huna used to get the first aliyah on Shabbos, even though he wasn't a Kohen, indicates that even though it's a halachic preference, it's not engraved in stone, so to speak. But again, after Rabbeinu Tam, normative practice is not to give a non-Kohen the first aliyah if there's a Kohen around. Yes.
If the non-Kohen gets the aliyah, does the Kohen, and to avoid embarrassment, have to leave the kahila?
No. Yes. Well, I say yes and no. There are those who say he should step out, and there are those who say he shouldn't step out. And you use different language. You can say, even though there's a Kohen here, Bimkom Kohen, or It's not a problem because we don't do it today anymore. The only time you do it, sometimes on a weekday, if you have a yard site or several yard sites. And even though a yard site is not a mandatory halachic imperative to get an aliyah, Jewish tradition has made it so. So sometimes a Kohen will step out, but he should come back in for the actual kriya. You step out for the Baruch Hu part, but you should come back inside so it doesn't miss kriya satorah. Okay, the Rambam is he writes against those who honor Kohanim before Talmidei Chachamim. So he says the halacha of the Kiddush Tov, of giving preference to a Kohen, doesn't apply when there's a Talmid Chacham who's greater than the Kohen. Again, theoretically, that's his psak, but again, the Mishnah says, Ibnei Darkei Sholom, in order not to cause problems, we don't do it. Who's a Talmid Chacham, who's not a Talmid, who's a bigger Talmid Chacham? We don't want to get into that discussion. The Tur, interestingly enough, the Tur is writing in the 14th century. He quotes the Rush that on a weekday, a Kohen can give away his aliyah to somebody else, but on Shabbos and Yontif, he may not, unless there is a Gadol Muflog. But still, the Gaonim paskin that the Kohen gets the first aliyah no matter what. There are a lot of different customs where we show them are all over the place in terms of whether or not Kavod Torah is best served by giving the honor to a Talmid Chacham over a Kohen. A lot of again, our normative practice today is that we don't do that. Even though there might be a great Rav, a great Talmid Chacham in the room, you still give it to a Kohen. You give him Shlishi perhaps, or actually Hagba and Glila are considered more important than a regular aliyah. That was a separate shiur that we gave. But again, Jewish tradition sometimes goes in a different direction than what the halacha would mandate. And it creates new practices. If there's only one, the Maharam Shik pretty much asks what Pete's question was, if there's only one Kohen in town, and he keeps on getting the aliyah all the time, can he relinquish his right to that aliyah? And again, he theoretically, he can do that because he is giving his right over to the tzibur, not to any individual. So that Dr. Schultz issue wouldn't apply. But on a normal situation, the Kohen's position is pretty much fixed, and he shouldn't be doing it. Again, you have different Rishonim and Achronim Paskin. Rabbi Moshe has a long tshuva on this, and he says that there is justification, as we've seen, to give a non-Kohen an aliyah on a Monday or a Thursday, but we don't want to insult Kohanim, he says, of previous generations. And he says that if a minhag is based on Kavod Torah, then there might be room to give it to a non-Kohen, but he kind of waffles on that. The Ramah paskins the halacha that on a tanis, if there's no Kohen who is fasting, even though he's in the shul, the aliyah goes to a non-Kohen, and then the Kohen should at least walk out. Because if a Kohen is there and someone else gets the first aliyah, you don't want to indicate that this guy might not be a kosher Kohen. There's a whole question of yuchsin, who is a Kohen, who isn't a Kohen. So if the guy walks out, then there's no question that you have any chash, you're worried about it. The Taz, on the other hand, says a Kohen should never leave when an aliyah is given to a non-Kohen. But again, that existed mostly in the time of the Gemara. Today, the Kohen always gets the first aliyah. And the reason the Kohen always gets the first aliyah is that we don't want to give any doubt or cast any aspersions on the status of that person who is a Kohen. Yes, question.
What if he's not Shomer Shabbos?
Okay, so if he's not a Shomer Shabbos person, and that goes along, and I wish we had more time to get into it, that also goes along with the question of there are many shuls that allocate aliyahs based on donations as well. So a non-Shomer Shabbos Kohen is still a Kohen. In terms of duchening, in terms of other kibbudim, a Kohen still has a certain status. And even he may not be the finest example of Jewish observance, nevertheless, his status remains intact. The only time a Kohen's status is impugned is if he is a murderer, convicted of murder. Other than that, a Kohen's status doesn't change. Yeah?
If there's something that specifically violates the statute of Cohen.
Yes.
Right, that's the other.
Yes, if he marries a widow or a divorcee or something like that, if he does something that impugns his own status as a Kohen, that's different. But by Shomer Shabbos, it's not preferable. And if there are other Kohanim there, I say give it to the other Kohanim. But if he's the only Kohen around, he still gets it because his biological sanctity is that of a Kohen, and you can't take that away from him. Yeah.
I know that like in some shuls, I don't know if they do it here or not. If, you know, you have your quote Shabbos regulars.
Yes.
And then, so if there's a guest or just some stranger that wanders in, very often a gabbai or somebody will go up and say, oh, welcome, my name is
Yes.
so are you a Kohen? Are you a Levi?
Right,
You
right.
know, and you take the person's word for it, and you don't at that point say, well, you know, do you observe Shabbos? Do you observe kasher? You just ask
No.
if they're going Levi. So that's giving the kavod for the,
So,
you know, the thing without going into any details.
well, again, you don't ask a person if he's Shomer Shabbos or he's kosher. And among the orders that are listed by some Achronim of Kibbudim is a guest. I mean, after you have all the, you know, the Sadek, and the Moel, and the Chassan, and the Bar Mitzvah boy, you list all, then you have the guest. And if there's a guest in shul and you want to give him an aliyah, that's fine. If he's a Kohen or a Levi, then it's nice to give. Yeah, we don't distinguish anymore. You know, again, if there is a great Talmud Chacham in shul at Shabbos, you would honor him. You won't give him Kohen or Levi, but you'll give him an aliyah because he gets bumped up in the status level of precedence, the order of precedence. Again, I'll go over the list in a moment. There's a lot of stuff, discussions here. The Magen Avram, there's a lot of interesting halachas on Simchas Torah. When we read many times, also bracha, we don't always call it Kohen or Levi. So we call Yisrael. Simply, you ran out of Kohanim and Levim at Simchas Torah when you keep on reading Zosar bracha. But we do follow the precedents today. There's another question in terms of the non-Kohen Levi position about family members. Why you don't call two father and a son, one after the other. Again, it's permissible to do it. There's no halachic reason why you can't call two blood relatives one after the other, but we don't do it because of the ayin hara. We don't want to cause jealousy. Somebody, oh, this guy has a wonderful son, and father and son, you know, and you don't want to cause enmity or jealousy based on that. So we generally do not give a father and son an aliyah one after the other. You're separated by at least one other person, especially when you have a bar mitzvah or other simcha. You don't want to call two blood relatives one after the other.
You keep switching between blood relatives and father and son, because I've seen grandfather and bar mitzvah.
Okay, so that's a machlokes. There many poskim holds that this should apply to grandfathers and grandsons as well, and brothers. And generally, we try not to call one after the other. If you have a kaddish in between, like from Maftir or Acha, whatever it might be, then you could do it. You can call it Hagba and Galila. There's a lot of, again, you're not dealing with a halachic situation here. Again, Judaism has many traditions that have grown over the years, and people think it's a halachic situation, but ayin hara is not a halachic category. It's a Kabbalistic category. But again, jealousy is something we try to avoid. What's that?
Hagba and Galila, when I was Gabbai Beth, they were in the rule, not give Hagba and Galila fathers.
That's, Habangali you don't, because it's like two, one after the other. That's correct.
I've seen that done quite often, purposely, so.
I can't go there.
Molly,
Yes,
if it's a family of Kohanim and the grandson or the son is a Talmud Chacham, can he bypass the father for the Kohanim Leah?
there are many poskim who would say yes. But normally we would not, because even the father, as a father, deserves a certain amount of primacy in that relationship. And the son, being a Talmud Chacham, would probably want it that way. Again, you can give a Kohen Mafta, you can give a Kohen Hagba or Galila, and as we've discussed earlier, Hagba and Galila are in fact more significant than an Aliyah. Give a person a Hagba is the Mishnah says is more important than the other 7 Aliyahs. Yeah.
So you have 4 generations, right, where the 3rd generation just had a baby. And now they're naming the baby Shiur Shabbos. And there's Aliyahs, plenty of Aliyahs to go around.
Right.
Who gets the first Aliyah after the father, right? Grandfather or the great? So where does the allegiance go first? I think this is a priority.
Okay.
I would
The Lavush, there are a number of Rishonim and Achronim who answer this question, and there's a whole list of the order of Aliyos. Among the people who deserve an Aliyah, I'll give you some highlights, and I'll go through the whole list if I can. On Yomim Noraim, the Baal Tokeya and the Baal Musaf, assuming they're not getting paid for davening, they should get an Aliyah. They have primary call. The father of a baby who's having a bris, as well as a sandek and a moel. The father of a baby boy or girl, the first Shabbos that the mother attends shul. A chasan, and by the way, the definition of a chasan, you're not a chasan until you get married. We do it backwards. We have the ufruth, the Shabbos before the wedding. The Sephardim do it right. They have it the Shabbos after the wedding, because you're not a chasan until you get married. So it makes sense to do that. A chasan who's going to get married for the first time has certain primacy. If he's getting married in a few weeks, but this is his last Shabbos in town, he gets an aliyah. Bar mitzvah boy, a chasan the week after. There's a whole long list that I'll try to make it quick. A chasan on his wedding day, Shabbos beforehand, a bar mitzvah boy, the husband of a woman who gave birth, a chasan on the Shabbos after his wedding, a yortzeit on Shabbos, meaning the day that his father or mother died. Key words, father or mother. That's the yortzeit that takes precedence.
Father goes before the mother.
Huh?
If you have 2 people, one has a good site for a father.
Or a
One
mother.
has a good site for a mother. One was the good site, but the father has priority.
Not necessarily, father or mother, they're equal. In terms of kadima for aliyos, a parent will be equal in that regard.
Not for a brother.
Brother-in-law, uncle, aunt. Well, that's but again, the halakha does not distinguish. The father on the Shabbos before a bris, the father is entitled to an aliyah. The moral and the sandek get an aliyah on the day of the bris if there are enough aliyahs, and if that's the custom in that community. Let's see.
You mentioned before about the mother coming back to school for the first time.
Right.
after giving birth.
Yes.
Can you speak about that a little bit?
We don't do that today.
Our community is not very big on that, but I remember that growing up, if a woman came to shul the first time after she gave birth, her husband gets an aliyah. And she also very often might bench gomel in the women's section. You don't see that too. We occasionally see that in Shomrei Torah, where a woman, after she gave birth, the first time she comes back, after davening, will get a minyan together in the back of the shul, and she'll bench gomer. Yeah, so that we do here. The husband can get an aliyah and bench gomer for his wife. Usually, if somebody gives birth, the husband gets an aliyah, he will bench gomer for his wife. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, sure. Oh, yes, oh, yes. Giving birth is a very serious, I mean, it could be very serious. And getting through the number of complications that could come up during birth, if a woman comes through that healthy, without any difficulties, it's definitely worth benching gomer, because unfortunately, many women die in childbirth. So it's considered a very significant surgical procedure. I can call it that. Interesting, a widower may not be a chiyuv before his wedding. Interesting. He's not entitled to an aliyah, even though we probably might do it. But that's interesting in the halacha. A chassan whose wedding was delayed can get an aliyah twice, perhaps. Let's see. If you have two chassanim, the one who is marrying a woman for the first time gets precedence over getting married to a woman who's already been married. Okay, when it comes to yard sites, it's considered a chiyuv by tradition, not by halacha. And again, any type of a yard site that might be more serious in terms of an obligation would only be for a parent. But he's preceded by a bris and all the other kedima. The yard site is not necessarily a priority if there are other priorities in existence at that time. If it's during the week, it's not enough of a chiyuv to push aside a baal bris or a father. But our minhag is to call him up if there's no other chiyuv. A woman who had a miscarriage, her husband is considered a chiyuv, unless she miscarried very, very early in the pregnancy. You mentioned about Tokay and the Baal Musaf. Interestingly, there's a whole discussion. There are shuls, many shuls, that give aliyahs based on the donation associated with it. And this has spawned a whole other discussion. In what's his name? In Hanhagos, big posek in Israel. I'm just blanking out on his name. Rav Sternbuch. Rav Sternbuch paskind that when you get an aliyah in a shul that does it for donations, you're not allowed to say matana lebeis hakneses. If you're giving a donation, then you have to give at least 18 shkolim, or $18 in America. You have to, but it's considered a bizayon to the Sefer Torah. If you're getting an aliyah because you're making a donation, you can't say matana lebeis hakneses. Now that's his psak. Again, people do what they do, but that's his psak.
Nowadays, here, we don't generally give on that basis.
Well, don't say that, because in many places, especially on Yom Tov and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, they do give aliyahs. When Shomrei Torah was first started in the beginning, and we were at a point where those families that were here literally lent money to the shul to pay our expenses. People lent money on a rolling basis, and we drew lots every month to who would get paid back. Because the shul needed money. And I remember Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, there were people who came only on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, not Shomer Shabbos people, guys who were wearing shoes on Yom Kippur, and they got aliyahs on Yom Kippur. Because the shul needed the money. And in many, and I'm sure we're not unique in that regard. And in some places, now thank Baruch Hashem, we're not in that position anymore, although we could always use money. But clearly, that is also part of what has become Minhag Yisrael.
But the whole concept live issues about, Malbim Pnei Chavercha Rabbi.
Yeah.
Just because somebody might, for some people, $18 that particular week or month might be a lot of money.
100%.
And to embarrass a person because you might not be able to cough up the money
So
is horrible.
you're 100% correct. We don't want to embarrass people, and which is
That's why
why.
when you say Matana Levei Knesset,
Well,
it
because
might be $5, but no one needs to know that.
understood. But on the other hand, when you are called up to the Torah, you're being honored, and there are certain, if a person, it's a valid point. 18 shkolim, according to Rav Sternbach, is a minimal gift that a person should give. But your point of view is 100% on target, because, and I don't know if it still exists, when the Young Israel movement was founded in the 1950s, and it's very different now than it was then, but when the Young Israel movement was founded, in order to become a Young Israel synagogue, in the charter, it says you may not solicit donations for aliyos. That was part of your charter. They also said if you close the shul, Young Israel gets the property. But aside from that, but they were right. No schnuttering, no asking for donations, because that was for the reasons that you mentioned, and also the fact that it's inappropriate. You don't buy kibudim, which again, the fact that it's called kibudim is also it lacks something. Again, the money goes for tzedakah, and again, it's dependent on the judgment of the, I guess, the gabbai or the rabbi in terms of what the practice in that particular shul is. And some achronim hold that when the custom to sell the aliyos exists, we sometimes even disregard chiyuvim in order to give it to the person who, with the exception of a chassan on Shabbos or a bar mitzvah boy, those cannot be set aside. But everything else you can set aside for a big donor. And the Mishnah Berurah says you can't do that. And if you have to make hosafos to accommodate the big givers. There's also a category of people who own the Sefer Torah or who donated a Sefer Torah. Again, to read from his personal Sefer Torah, to give him an aliyah, and also it's part of the calculation. And then discussions about the two Baalei Simcha at the same time. What if you call the wrong person? What if someone has a chiyuv, but someone else is going to make a bigger donation? What if somebody actually wrote the Sefer Torah or purchased it? He takes precedence over somebody who inherited the Sefer Torah. There's a lot of discussion on Kedima, so there are a lot of interesting rules. Again, a lot of this depends on the local minhag of the shul. As far as an obligation for a yortzeit to daven for the amud or to get an aliyah, to get an aliyah is mentioned among the early Rishonim, but davening for the amud is more of a Kabbalistic or Hasidic innovation. Again, is it absolutely mandatory that a person who has a yortzeit daven for the amud? Is it a quote unquote chiyuv? Answer is no. Because there are more important criteria. The person who gets up to daven for the amud has to have certain criteria. He has to be Rusa HaKohol. He has to be able to read properly. He has to have a pleasant voice. That takes precedent of everything else. And I've seen situations where this doesn't always happen. I'll just end with two personal observations. It bothers me very, very much when you have these young kids who daven for the amud, and for some reason in day schools and yeshivas today, kids just fly through the davening. They read it as fast as they can, like it's a contest, a race. It drives me crazy.
Worst part was swallow words.
If they swallow the words, they make mistakes. But the point is, I don't know how they're teaching kids to daven today, or if they're teaching you at all how to daven. That's number one. The other thing is that sometimes people who have yard sites, who claim the Amud, so to speak, can't read all that well, or they read too slow, or they stumble over the words. I remember many, many years ago, when I was at my first job as a principal, we had a gentleman, I'll mention his name, is well known in the community, who had a yard site. His mother just died, and he wanted to daven in the yeshiva minyan every morning, but his Hebrew was very weak, and he would daven slowly and make mistakes, and every morning the kids would get to class late because of that. And I finally said to him, you know, with great trepidation, because he was a big donor and a lovely fellow, I said, I can't have you, I know it's a yard site, I'm not a yard site, it's a year of Avelus, but I can't have you daven for the Amud because kids are getting to class too late. And it was heartbreaking. And this was a lovely person. It just, but.
What do you say?
So he went to another shul. I don't know if he got to daven for the Amud there or not, but he didn't come to minyan anymore. He still kept on giving money. He was a good neshama. He was a wonderful person. He's still around, and he's still a very, very charitable person. But you know, sometimes you have to make tough decisions, and not everybody who gets up to daven for the Amud for a yard site should be davening for the Amud.
What about I guess it's social pressure or something, that a bar mitzvah boy needs to learn the whole parsha? There are kids for all kinds of reasons for whom that is extremely challenging.
Okay, so
going back to embarrassing somebody, you know, even people who can't read Hebrew, who are sitting there listening to a bar mitzvah boy clearly struggle, even though they don't know Hebrew and don't know whether the kid, but they can tell if the kid keeps stopping or it's much slower or something. Who's doing that pressure?
Well,
it's a rough one on the kid.
In some shuls, there's an individual who's an expert Bal Koreh who vets all the Bali Kriya. My son-in-law is a wonderful Bal Koreh, and in the Young Israel where he davens, everybody had to pass a laning test from him, child or adult, in order to lane on Shabbos. And for a number of years, they had wonderful Bali Kriya, but as the quality went down, he stepped back, says, I can't do this anymore, because the pressure was too great. And unfortunately, you have people laning who shouldn't be laning. It's very nice, it says bar mitzvah, let them lane maftir, let them lane the first, whatever it might be. You don't have to, I mean, when I was bar mitzvahed, way back in Stone Age, it wasn't yet the custom for bar mitzvah boy to lane the whole parsha. So I think I just laned maftir, which I feel bad about because I never learned how to lane generally. But I laned maftir, and that was it. I laned my own aliyah, and I davened musaf. That I could do. But you're right, and there should be a system that not everybody who wants to lane should be given that opportunity unless somebody says this guy is a decent Bal Koreh. Yes, Nathan.
When my first Shabbos here, they called to the Torah, Natan ben Yaakov Alevi. And I went up with Aliyah, but somebody else was named Yaakov, Natan ben Yaakov Alevi. So I don't remember his name, but he was a watchmaker. So other people will remember. So what happens in that case? I was there first, but they didn't call, they weren't really referring to me. So what happens in that case?
Well, what was the intention of the person who, the Gabbai? If the Gabbai wanted to give it to you, and somebody else got up there instead of you, you don't want to embarrass that person by making him step down once he's already up there.
Right.
Normally, you'd look at each other and say, you or me, and then you figure out who gets the aliyah. But again, the point is not to embarrass somebody. So
I've had that.
if the person got up there, when he's up there already, so you'll get the next lady.
Right.
Yeah.
When Rabbi Yudin was away, so I've been covering a lot of the Sunday Shiur, and one of the questions that I put out there to everybody was, we had a case where you had a shul,
Right.
where every week they sold the lease, very rich.
Yes, it's all, okay.
Okay, and this person went ahead and he put a certain aliyah because it was a couple, right? And then what happened was, fifth aliyah, was Rabbi made an assumption. So the aliyah that he wanted to buy was not the one that he ended up, and it cost him like $200.
Right.
So when the push came to shove, he said, I'm not paying for it. Because
He wanted a specific aliyah.
I only, he didn't voice that at the time that he bought it. So the question was, that was put out there, does he have to pay for it?
Okay, and how'd you resolve it?
But the bottom line was, if he voiced in the beginning that he wanted that the reason that he would win the case, it all depends if the shul makes hasafas on it. If they regularly make hasafas all the time, then he had to be on notice that it could possibly happen.
Well,
If they didn't make hasafas, then the shul basically was at loss.
So let me give you my take on that. There are some shuls that have a policy of no hosafos, period. And in that case, there wouldn't be a problem. But most shuls do have hosafos, and if a guy made a pledge to give X amount of money for an aliyah, you really can't say that one aliyah is more important than another, and I would obligate him to make good on his pledge. I'll just finish up with this, that in Shomrei Torah, we used to have a ritual committee. We haven't had one for decades. And when the shul was first started, they met and discussed issues like this. There is a need for a ritual committee. There is a need to publish a list of regulations of the shul. There are some shuls in Israel that publish a book of what their regulations are for all that cover all these circumstances. Because we had no policy about hosafos, and there was one member whose name I won't mention who had a bar mitzvah, and there were something like 17 hosafos. And after that Shabbos, the board met. It wasn't even a ritual committee, and they said no more than 10 aliyahs in any Shabbos. Period. You can't make more than 3 hosafos, and that would be it, because it was interminable. It was interminable. But
I remember exactly who it was.
Yes.
Without mentioning that.
Without mentioning
But-
good. So we all know who it was.
Okay. However, my
yes,
point, when it comes to hosafos, if you have a bar mitzvah boy who's a Kohen, and his father is a Kohen, and an
Right.
elderly grandfather is there, I don't think there should be an issue with having a hosafa to give the kavod to the elderly grandfather who's also a Kohen.
Okay,
The
but that's
father
what
gets
I want to
one.
do. So,
What?
so you can give achron. I mean, that's fine.
Exactly, that one should get achron. So that achron is a hosafa. So I don't think there's anything wrong with doing a hosafa if
I'm
it
not-
is necessary.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but you have to have a limit. Otherwise,
of
the davening will go
course.
on forever.
Of course,
It's
there
a
has to be a
fascinating.
limit.
It's another example. All of these halachos about yard sites and chiyuvim and who gets precedent. These are all, I would say, not strictly halachic issues, but minhag issues. And every shul will make up their own policy. But I will conclude by saying that there should be, in Shomrei Torah at least, a revival of the ritual committee and to go over all these things and to publish a booklet of all the shul procedures to cover almost as many circumstances as possible, so we can refer to it. And even though Gaboyim may change after a while and different people might come into office, there is a shul policy that we should be adhering to. In any event, have a wonderful day. And
Wally,
no other questions? Yes, last question.
in the case where the person who davened, where you unfortunately had to make that decision, would that take precedence, the tzibur over the individual? If an
Say
individual,
that again, a person?
no, in other words, you had an individual, the kids were coming late to
Yes.
school. Okay, in other words, the tzibur and the children, etc., would take precedence over the fact that he felt that he was a chiyuv and had to daven. I mean, sometimes you have to, the tzibur takes precedent, obviously, in every situation.
Yes, absolutely.
I know it's
Tzibur
a
always takes precedence.
tough decision for you, but he should have realized himself, but.
Well, this is why there should be a manual of procedures in every shul to avoid these machlokes. You
How
point
long
to
did
it.
it last? How long did it last until unfortunately you had to do it? A few weeks?
No, that policy is still in effect today.
No, I meant, how long did he daven before everyone realized that it was ridiculous?
Well, they weren't going to embarrass him on his bar mitzvah's, son's bar mitzvah day, so it just kept on going until it was over. But after that Shabbos, a policy went into effect.
Right.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Have a great day. Great day.
Have a sign of a
Thank you, Wally. Thank you.
Wally.
Baruch Adonai b'shus kol nesim kan v'rech shechal mishalo. Baruch shechal mishalo tuvo chayinu. Tamid lo chosel anayach sam. Kim v'zon v'neisal kol mitiv v'kol michim azon chobri yosef Hashem baruch. Baruch ato Adonai hazon es v'kol. Baruch ato Adonai al haaretz v'al hamazon. Uvenei Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh Meira v'Yameinu Baruch ato Adonai v'leverachamo v'Yerushalayim Amen. Mikol tu v'yolam ha'yichasreinu. Okay.